Tui te whakaaro, tui te kōrero. Ka puta te muka tangata, ko ai tēnā, ko tātou tēnā e piri nei I tēnei ahiahi, no reira tēnā koutou katoa. Ka mihi ki te whare nei, ka mihi ki nā atua e tiaki nei a tātou I tēnei huihuinga. Ka mihi hoki kia te Aotearoa, Ngāti toa rangatira, ko tēnei reo e pupu ake I raro I te maru o maunga taranaki no reira, ka mihi kia rāua. Kia ku rangatira, toko maha koutou I tēnei whare. Tētai e te tapaina. Toko maha koutou. Ko etehi, ko wehe atu, ko rau, tauni kake, kauri konei, toko puari, kami atu kia koutou katoa. I'm not able to name you all, but ka mihi atu kia koutou. Ka mihi hoki kia cha, nā kai whakahaere o tēnei huinga. Tino miharo, kia hau nei nā kaupapa, kua kōrerotia. Tino miharo, no reira ka mihi. Kia koutou katoa, ka mihi rā kia koutou, ti hei mauri ora. Ostensibly, I'm here to provide an update on the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. Here's the update. It's here, and it wasn't a year ago. We're doing Auckland Māori housing summits, and we weren't doing that 18 months ago, and we're going to be doing another one next year, provided the board approves that on Monday. But here we are, quick disclaimer, because I work for the board, I'm not the board, and I'm not on the board, I work for the Secretariat. And just on that note, I'd like to say, I'm very, very proud to work for one of the very, very few organisations in this country, he wero tēnei kia tātou katoa, one of the very, very few organisations in the country whose core role is to advise on the implementation of the treaty, which is what we do in Tamaki Makaurau for Auckland Council. It's somewhat criminal that there aren't more of us. And I can tell you, when I graduated with my degree in Māori Studies in 2000, there weren't jobs like the one I've got now. So very proud and very lucky. So here's my disclaimer. The views I express are not necessarily those of the Independent Māori Statutory Board, but to the extent that I promote outcomes in the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan, which hopefully some of you have had a chance to look at, I definitely know in my heart and my mind, because I'm very lucky to work with those board members on a daily basis, that they remain 100% committed to the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. And my job, 99% of the time, is to promote those outcomes to the very best of my ability, which is why you've probably heard a few things from me over the last year or so. So kia ora. Also, just really briefly, I've been afforded a little more time than I had on the program, so I just wanted to shout out, really. There's some real rangatira, and I'm just going to name a few to let you know who I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Moana, Dr. Jackson, Tamati Patuwai, Ella, Jess, me ki ro tui te ao Māori. But I'd also like to say, if Mary Simpson's still here, my Pākehā whanaunga who cries when she talks about the treaty, kia ora. Because that's me. And if I don't cry in this, it's just because I haven't quite said the right words. Otherwise, I'm going to go right over the edge. Okay, so I've given you a brief update on the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. I can't cover all the details, obviously, in this. So here's what we're going to do in the next 21 minutes or so. I'm going to quickly talk about the links between the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan and the shift. I have circulated a paper, and I think Char circulated it further around, which kind of explores this for you, but there's something obviously we want to drill down on today. We're going to have a look at a bit of a challenge around 3 public sector policy, which I'm calling little s shifts. I'm going to move into 3 public sector big policy, big S shifts. And I don't mean big ass shifts, I mean big S shifts. And then 1 public, not a public sector, but a public, big S shift. So hopefully we get there. And hopefully it's not entirely boring. So just going to summarise briefly the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan and how I personally see it fitting in with the shift. We're really promoting a shift to treaty-based governance, treaty-based operations, mō tātou katoa. That's from, and we have this conversation often, from the executive arm of government, as Huri mentioned the other day, to, we might as well just say the operational arm of government, to the way we work together, to the way the sector works together, and I don't mean just the housing sector, I mean NGOs, kia NGOs. Right across the board, the treaty provides us with a framework for working better in our context of New Zealand. The Kāinga Plan has quite a wide range of proposals for institutional change, and it puts the treaty at the heart of that, makes some pretty bold calls for co-governance, and if we just take one really glaring example, we look at what the Housing and Urban Development Authority is likely to look like. I'm not talking about the ability of that organisation to partner with iwi. From what I'm hearing from ministers and from what I'm hearing from iwi like Ngāi, that's actually going pretty well. What I'm talking about is the governance of the authority. The governance board of the authority as a co-governance board. That's the shift. In a similar ilk, we've called for an Auckland Māori Housing Commissioner. The number of roles that could play in Auckland right now is almost uncountable, although we tried to include as many as we could in the notes in the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. What I'll say right now on that briefly is there's 19 iwi in Auckland. There's differing numbers, but I'm going to say 32 because that's what the board's got in its documents. 32 iwi or mātāwaka marae, so excluding institutional marae. And there's a ton of NGOs. What if they all had one place to go to talk about Māori housing outcomes, an expert place? A commissioner who was an expert, supported by a commission of experts to advise both the government and Māori on what the best next step could be. We've tried to put a tiny stake in the ground with the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan in that direction, but it is a tiny stake in the ground. We want to build a curriculum and we're working with some partners to do that. I'm going to speed up now. Well, I'm going to pause actually on this one and then speed up. The regional Māori housing provider of scale, listen, that's why I'm here really, is because this is in our action plan, and as I said, I'm employed to promote our action plan. A regional Māori housing provider of scale in Tāmaki Makaurau, I'm talking about, that's where our board has its mandate, opens up a whole range of opportunities that sit below the Māori Housing Commission. So I'll just leave that there for a moment. It sits within that institutional change bracket of what we're talking about in the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan. I guess what I'd like you to take away from the plan, though, at the moment is that the plan has a really good go at shaping things up from a treaty perspective and shaping things up from a whānau and kāinga perspective. It ain't perfect, but we gave it a crack. So it's probably some good pointers if you're thinking about that journey, and I think it's certainly a good resource to be used in other ways. And lastly, we're in the middle really of a shift. Our relationship's really strong with CHAR, and also a number of community housing providers in Auckland have endorsed the plan independently, which is very, I was going to say gratifying, but that's not really the right word. We're very pleased to have those endorsements coming in from the community, and we're hoping to grow that. So listen, I just want to focus on this because this is where we're at, and I'm going to drill down on some stuff. So what I've learned, I'm very, very much a latecomer to this game. I've only been really in it for 2 years since my CEO said, you're our principal advisor of social outcomes, and the social outcome of priority for us right now is housing. So get your gumboots on and do some stuff. So I've come in and I've had a look, initially from the outside of the sector, but then I've picked up my magnifying glass. But I've simplified my learnings, okay? What I've learned is there's a shift required. We need the right conditions. These are the conditions we need, in our view, to seed the creation of a regional Māori housing provider of scale in Tāmaki Makaurau. That's our perspective. The right conditions, the right incentives, and a coherent value proposition. What I've learnt from the sector is that there's an appetite to grow, but it's tough under the current conditions. The tools to grow include, and these are just starters for 10 folks, but this is where I'm at with my advocacy. The right conditions, we need inclusionary zoning. In Auckland, they were left out of the Auckland Unitary Plan. They need to be put in. We believe there's going to be unitary plan changes coming up in the next term of local government, which is obviously starting later on this year. And we've got high hopes. We've had some movement with the Planning Committee at Auckland Council, so we're sort of promoting all of the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan's outcomes en masse. The right incentives, access to finance, we want to plug it in. We want access to the low interest rate the government has so that we can seed and generate more spending in the sector. From our perspective, that is to enable the building of a regional Māori housing provider of scale, but as I understand it, the tools and requirements to do that align well with the tools and requirements required by the sector as well, and I hope that's the case. And we need a good value proposition, and I believe the government guarantee on qualifying developments is one of those, was a big part of those propositions. My question to myself is, if a Māori organisation walked in my door at work and said, hey, I see you've got this action plan, and you want there to be a Māori regional provider of scale in Auckland, well, I want to do it. What's the proposition? I'm going to be like, don't do it at the moment, the tools aren't in place. So that's why we're talking about the tools and the incentives. So here's a relatively simple proposition. If we want a plugged in, switched on pipeline of affordable housing, here's some starters for 10. The pipeline, inclusionary zoning, plug it in, access to government interest rate, and switch it on. De-risk some qualifying developments. I want to be clear though and pause there because this is not the shift. These are just some small decisions. These are actually very low cost, very low risk settings to be changed within government. This is not the shift. Be pretty useful though. So I guess what I want to highlight now is I'm going to go through a little bit of context building, and I like to think that this is essentially going to be themed on really on the shoulders of the kōrero from Moana Jackson and actually many others who have touched on this history. And I really appreciate the Science Challenge's presence here on day one, which set a constitutional, not just a government and not just a sector, but a constitutional context for our kōrero over the last 3 days. So the shift is a continuum in my view. And we're not just starting out, we need to recognise and leverage where we are. So at the Auckland Māori Housing Summit a few weeks ago, what we heard from the ministers was they're ready to talk about kāinga, they're ready to talk about whānau. They understand the need to talk about kāinga and whānau instead of just the financial development cost of their investments. The shift's in there somewhere, you know? We're going to put a little bit of context around that. Oh, listen, I need to pause there as well, because the shift's in here. Actually, that's the point. The shift's in here. You guys know all of that, right? You guys are the thought leaders in the shift. And I don't want to, I've just said that we need to recognise and leverage up. Well, I'm going to recognise you guys and leverage up you guys, because you guys are leading the shift, because I know from my, albeit short interactions with you, that you guys are values-based. That's the question here. Are we going to be values-based or are we going to be finance-based? So kia ora to you all. So here's a little bit of context, and I'm going to build on the idea of the continuum, okay? So let's just go back to 1972, and I know a few of you have done this. This is Ngā Tamatoa, an Auckland Māori protest group, protesting. I haven't quite used the right colours. One of the banners says, "Our enemy is the white man." This is a group of Pākehā protesters at the same time, and their banner says the treaty is a fraud. A moment in time, ladies and gentlemen, where there was significant civil unrest and conflict between two peoples in New Zealand. In 1975, the government passed the Treaty of Waitangi Act, which created the Waitangi Tribunal. And I'm just going to jump ahead of myself a little bit here and emphasise the importance of that. The reason that the board that I work for, and that I can, and that you all can, put up a case for what partnership means, or active protection means, or kaitiakitanga means, is because it is in New Zealand case law. It's been written by the Waitangi Tribunal, and it has been brought into New Zealand mainstream case law in numerous cases, mostly in the lands case. That is why we can talk confidently about what partnership is. So the latent question there is, why am I still advocating for co-governance in the Urban Development Authority when we have case law about what partnership means? Well, I don't quite know the answer to that. But there's a bigger shift at play here, and you'll all be aware of it, although it's up to you whether you've made the connection. In 1985, the tribunal was given a historic jurisdiction to look back into the grievances of Māori. But I'm going to completely reframe that because I hate that. I do not like the phrase, the grievances of Māori. I prefer the truths of what the Crown did. Kia ora moana. And the acceptance that there were wrongs done and the need to settle them. This is just an example, okay? 1997, Ngāi Tahu settling their historic grievances with the Crown. Jim Bolger and Sir Tipene. And there's no second guessing why I've put what I've put up there in orange. Government leadership, legislation, resources, courage, determination, and leveraging their scale is how they achieved that shift. And look, we're getting close on housing as well. As I said, I think we're somewhere like 90% along the continuum of the shift. There's no doubt there's further to go. Nanaya, a couple of weeks ago, it's got to happen with you and alongside you, Andrew Crisp. We need to be treaty anchored. We need to have a genuine treaty partnership. Still a lot of moving parts in the government space at the moment, and we really don't know where this stuff is going to land. So let's make sure we're a part of it. Oh, wrong button. And Minister Twyford, because the public servant doesn't have a monopoly on wisdom. Now that's a real shift. So, listen, there's some small settings in 2019. These could be done overnight by the government. Well, they couldn't actually. The pipeline, inclusionary zoning nationally, that's probably pretty hard, needs a national policy statement and a whole lot of advocacy by the government to local government, because one of the big problems with the treaty relationship and our power hegemony in New Zealand is that the government really struggles to work with local authorities. It's a travesty. Maybe think about that in the elections this year. All right, so I'm just going to pause there while you have a read through this little waterfall of things that come out of these three very small propositions. A pipeline, we plug it into finance, and we switch it on with the government guarantee. Now, there's more other tools that other providers need, and I completely acknowledge that. But listen, I'm just trying to simplify the kōrero for today. So listen, that's the first three. Here's the next three, and this is going to take me a little while, I'm afraid. I'm already over time, sorry, folks. Three public sector big policy shifts, and I'm going to start with well, if Huri Moana and Tamati are still here, it's really your kōrero. I believe that marae should be at the heart of service provision for whānau in Aotearoa. Marae are a resource that is wholly undervalued. And if the government cannot get its head around building relationships with marae and supporting marae to do what marae do as tikanga, then we're a long way from treaty partnership. What I've intimated there is that there is a bit of a kōrero in the te ao Māori space around the kaupapa Māori edge, because it can provide a commercial edge. There's no question about that, because guess what? Māori are our greatest thinkers and our greatest strategists. Go try and sail your waka from Hawaii. So I believe they need to be at the heart of service provision. I'm going to leave that there. The national policy statement, there's one coming up. It's being developed. I'm going to give a few pointers on what a national policy statement is. Enables the government to set objectives nationally and guide decision-making under the RMA. Just a note in light blue here, guide means give effect to. Important legal words that we shouldn't let the government forget when they're drafting their national policy statement. And I can only hope that the right mix and the right number of stakeholders are in the room when that gets finalised. Recalling Paul Hunt speaking yesterday, let's be clear, we have a measure to understand whether that national policy statement is going to be successful or not. Don't forget what you've heard at this summit, folks, this conference, sorry. Housing policies and strategies must have an explicit statement of the right to adequate housing. That is the most simple measure for us to consider whether that national policy statement is what we want it to be as the public of New Zealand. I'm tempted not to indulge you in a story, but I'm going to tell you because it's really important. Hopefully keep it in a minute. Ngātai recently won a case, Ngātai ki Tāmaki, in the Supreme Court of New Zealand. The Department of Conservation renewed a ferry licence to a company in Auckland to make trips to Rangitoto and Motutapu. Ngātai went to them and said, "How did you give effect to Section 4 of the Conservation Act when you made that decision?" The department said, "Well, we did. We thought about it." Ngātai took them to court. Ngātai lost. Ngātai appealed. Ngātai lost. Ngātai took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, Section 4 of the Conservation Act is very clear. This act shall be administered as to give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. How can we be in 2019 with a government department who doesn't understand what that means? That might have seemed like an indulgence, but I'm going to put it into context immediately. Here's some of my own handiwork drafting some legislation. The Kāinga Aotearoa Strategic Act 2021. And I don't mean this in isolation. We need a national housing strategy. It's in the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan, and it's a part of many of our kōrero over the last 3 days. I'm not going to bore you with Section 1 that I've written, because you can see it in bold. It means that we all get to be a part of developing it. Section 2, partnership is what the tribunal says it is, nothing more and nothing less. Now, I forgot Section 3 actually when I was drafting this. Does anyone know what Section 3 in a Crown Act says? This Act shall bind the Crown. So we must have that in there, because the last thing we want is a national strategy that doesn't bind the Crown. Section 4 is a mere addition to the Conservation Act statement, which has been proven to be quite strong by the Supreme Court recently, interpreted and administered as to give effect to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi and give effect to the human right to adequate housing. I'm tempted to ask for a hell yeah, or maybe just a chuckle. So that's 6 out of the 7 things I needed to cover, and this one's just going to take a moment. And it leaves me where I wanted to be, which is acknowledging the initiation of this kaupapa by Moana Jackson and his deep, meaningful, thoughtful kōrero. Moana, in his rifting style, couldn't help but criticise neoliberalism, which I'm sure we all know is when the government says we don't want to be involved, we want the markets to control everything. It's important to know what the other side of that coin is, though, which is Keynesian economics. Very successful in the American Depression. Roosevelt, I think, used it to buy America out of the Depression by investing something like $5 billion at the time in roading projects, social infrastructure, on the theory that when the government invests money, that money gets circulated around the economy. So one question is, do we want neoliberalism or do we want Keynesian economics? And I'm sure I'm stepping on, I see John Reed's just going, this guy's a dork, doesn't even know what he's talking about. Do we want neoliberalism or Keynesian economics? That's not the right question. Do we want a democracy and a state system that's based on the Treaty of Waitangi and partnership, which, as I'm sure you've heard all of our ministers recently, and Minister Twyford said it to me last night, you want to criticise neoliberalism, I'm there with you. But why are our systems of government over the last 70 years defined by economics? Well, the answer to that is that's the heart of the shift, and we need a system of government that's based on kāinga and whānau. Kia ora mai rā tātou.
Oh, kāre he kōrero tāku, tū atu I tērā. I'm not quite sure if I know how to expand on that, only to say that I think I might be a little bit overwhelmed at being in the room that might have just drafted up some legislation, the start of some legislation. O tino tēnei te mihi atu kia koe, Brennan. We haven't actually concluded this part of our presentation. Engari, ka tika kia huri atu ngā wakaro I tēnei wā, ki tō tātou nei minita, kua noota I ki wainga nui a tātou, tēnei te mihi atu kia koe, e nenaia, te pai wā, te hara mai nei, ki te rongo ake I ngā wakaro o te tangata ki tēnei kaupapa. So just to say, the Minister has arrived. She's not due to present yet, but it's always, I think, a very good sign when the Minister makes some time to just sit and listen and get a feel for what's going on. And very shortly, I'm going to encourage you to express what's going on by way of your feelings. In the meantime, Scott, I think I am going to invite Campbell to come forward and to continue this notion of making the shift, or e ara ko te notion, because as Brennan said, you've already started to make that shift over the last couple of days. So let's keep going, let's keep shifting, as Brennan shifts right off the stage. Kia ora, Campbell.
Thank you. We've already in the session this morning talked about KiwiBuy, and just for those of you that weren't part of that, just KiwiBuy has been a grouping, or the KiwiBuy campaign has been a grouping of Habitat, the New Zealand Housing Foundation, CHAR and Salvation Army. And it sprung out of a report that we did last year in the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit, Beyond Renting, in which we identified that the market, the private rental market was in serious trouble, and that the range of alternatives which were there to actually make that work actually were not working. And so we looked around, and one of the things that we came up was that one of the options, and one of the strong options, has got to be to rebuild home ownership in New Zealand. And Of course, we were faced with the fact that Kiwi Build had been put in place, but there is a difficulty in Kiwi Build in terms of affordability for people. So out of that, as we sat together as organisations, one of the things we realised was that the community housing sector was already getting people into housing affordably. And that there had been, in fact, hundreds of whānau who had joined into home ownership through those various rent-to-buy, shared ownership and other products. And so we said, well, let's take what is actually a creative and strong part of the community housing sector and let's ramp it up. And so Kiwi Buy is just that. It's asking that government take seriously these initiatives which are working in our community, which are engaging people into home ownership, and which actually would give a whole new life to Kiwi Build if in fact we could put these sorts of products alongside of what is currently being done. So what we want to do this morning is to launch a petition to government, and I'll just show you the petition. It's a very simple one. The petition title says, Government Fund Kiwi Buy Housing Products so more Kiwis achieve home ownership. And the action that's to be taken is that the House of Representatives request the government to fund a significant expansion of Kiwi Buy products currently offered by community housing providers. And then it expresses the reason for that. We believe there is a crisis in housing. The escalating cost of housing means many Kiwis cannot afford to buy a home. What was once considered to be the Kiwi birthright, the right to own a home, is lost for many families. The government has committed to Kiwi Build, the building of 100,000 houses. We believe that housing availability alone, however, does not change the fact that the cost of entry to these homes is unaffordable for many households. So the petition really is asking that the House of Representatives request the government to fund a significant expansion of the Kiwi Buy products currently offered by community housing providers. Now, that petition is sitting waiting to be approved. And we thought that we would, if you are in agreement with this, I'd like you to signal in some way in a moment, and then I will click the button there and we will approve it. It will be online, and then there will be opportunity for you to go back with an action that you can take, and that is to get people to sign up to the Kiwi Buy petition. So do I have your approval to... Okay, well, on that approval, if I can find the mouse pointer, oh, there it is. I'm not a robot. Thank you, and we will welcome your support.
Okay, you fellas need to stop having people like Moana and Henny and Pania and Ella at your hui, because you'll be getting all active on us up here. Not only are we we're drafting new legislation, now you're all going to go and do a petition, and next minute you'll be having a march and doing all these crazy things. Hey, look, if there was one thing Moana said to us on Monday, he said this is going to get a bit messy. And we are going to need to have a whole lot of different approaches, but at least be all on the same path. So if we have got to take different approaches to affect the shift that we have been speaking about, then e kore mutu te mihi ki rongi a koutou. Now, I think I meant to ask for thoughts or questions. You can use your app, or Scott's got the microphone there. I'm not quite sure if I've pulled it all together sufficiently enough. Scott, if you want to jump in.
Piri, you have pulled it together beautifully. Folks, can we give Piri a massive round of applause here? Thank you, Piri. We couldn't do this without you, Piri, so thank you. Now, what we're going to do is Jessica and I are going to be really calling for some comments. We've got a few folks who have already said to us, hey, we want to make some comments. And this is really around what will we do to deliver on the shift. So we're going to, Jessica and I are going to tag team here. I'm first going to hand over to Paul Gilbert to kick us off. Paul?
Hi all. I just think it's nice at moments like this in a conference to share, excuse me, Minister, I'm not going to have my back to you, to share some of the stuff that happens out there during a conference, because there's been a lot of conversations going on. And so just to make you all aware that at Housing Foundation at the moment, we're actively working with 21 iwi and hapu now across the country, Te Raroa in the far north and down to Ngāi Tahu in the south and everywhere in between. And as part of that movement, which has really kicked off in the last 12 months, I've also had some meetings while we've been down here with three of the largest churches in the country who have committed to get together and do a real thorough review of their assets, their land, which is substantial because the three of them combined have $10 billion worth of assets across Aotearoa, and they are wanting to look at delivering real housing outcomes using their land and their assets in partnership with all of us here. So we had a meeting yesterday on that. There will be a meeting very shortly of the leaders of those three churches, which we will be facilitating. And I think they're ready to commit to sort of numbers. And we've talked loosely at this stage around 1,000 dwellings, but I just wanted to signal that that's come out of this hui and to let you all know that those conversations are happening. Happy to talk to anybody about that.
Thanks, Paul. So that's our first 1,000. Okay. Jessica, over to you.
Okay, kia ora everybody. I'm going to pass over to Jackie Paul from our Rangatahi Ahu and our Kāinga research program.
Kia ora koutou. Sorry, I'll just wriggle over here. Firstly, I just wanted to mihi to everyone for being here and being in this space and sharing what a huge 2.5 days to absorb all this information and process that. I think just regarding our kaupapa Māori research, it's really solidified and validated our mahi in terms of where to next for our rangatahi. Awesome to make, touch base with those who are working in terms of delivering youth housing. So awesome kaupapa for us to support, as well as just want to support the mahi that Brendan is doing up in Tāmaki Makaurau. It's great to understand who's doing what, where, and touch base, but for us to continue that advocacy within the spaces that we work in, not just kaupapa Māori research, but for us who are doing design and education and all those multifaceted spaces that we work in, it's all a huge ecosystem, and for us it's all the same kaupapa. So tēnei te mihi ka koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks for that. Hey, is Rowena from Panina Health? Rowena, are you here with us this morning? I wasn't sure whether she was going to be able to make. I just want to pass along in terms of our Pacific friends in whānau here, is that I know that Panina is one of our growth chips in the community housing sector, and I know that her goal initially is to be able to deliver at least 200 units that'll work for their intergenerational families. So we're going to add 200 to the list, but I know her aspirations are far, far greater than that. So I'm going to put Panina down for 1,000 as well. I'm going to hand over to, do you want to go back to you, Jessica, or do you want me to pass over to Gary? You want ready to go, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce Te Pora Emery, who works on a research project or leads a research program at Toiōho Mai that didn't present at the conference. We've had quite a range of Māori research programs that haven't presented, so I'm just signalling that you got a snapshot of one part of it. So pleasure to pass the microphone over to Te Pora.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, e paku ingoa tāku nei kia tatau. E au e kimi ana I wētahi kōrero hei whakapiri atu ki ngā kōrero katoa o tēnei huhuinga o tatau. Ki te au I tēnei kōrero no Confucius. I was looking for something to, I guess, embellish the kōrero that we've had over the last 3 days and found something from Confucius. And he says that the strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home. So kia ora.
Ka pai, kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks for that, Jessica. So Gary Moore's been working on an interesting project with us around really kind of trying to activate a lot of the range of opportunities, I guess, to take small providers to growth and take our large providers to scale as well. Gary, can you tell us a bit about that?
Kia ora, and greetings everyone. I've spent a portion of my life in politics, and I think one of the things we've got to do is we've got to actually put ourselves in the shoes of the people who are receiving our message. And if you look at the ministers are constantly busy and constantly lobbied. So the way we package our message is of fundamental importance. And also, I think we've also got to look at housing and urban development. That organisation is led by one of the finest public servants I've set my eyes on for a long time. But the thing you've got to realise, and going back to the last slide there before, the thing you've got to realise is that the advisors that they are battling against have been trained in neoliberal economics. And so we've actually got to package our message properly. And our message, and I'm working with a number of the agencies at the moment to sort of try and package these together. But our lesson is in history. When I look at my mother and father, they survived an earthquake and a world war, and the government of the day decided it was important enough to focus on housing. And our mothers could capitalise their family benefit as a deposit for a house. They could get into a state house and there was no stigma in being in a state house. Or they could get a 3% loan. And what we actually have to do as a sector, because we've talked about all these things in the last few days, is actually repackage those lessons of the past. And when people were talking this morning about Māori not being in housing, I had a whole lot of friends who'd gone through Māori pre-apprentice training, and they got a loan from Māori Affairs, and they owned their own homes. And we've actually got to go back to that. So we have to package what we're saying. We actually have to put our package in a way that the politicians can say but, and we supply the but. And we've got to look at things like, why aren't we asking the government, why can't we capitalise the accommodation supplement? Why can't we start looking at the $2.3 billion that's being spent to prop up my generation's superannuation schemes? Why can't we say, put 10% of that aside and let's start working with our sector? Why can't we start looking at the ownership of land and creating... The Queenstown model is something we should be looking at. We should be saying, who owns the land in New Zealand? The largest landowners are central government, local government, iwi, and the churches. Why aren't we looking to create a new housing type, a land type? If our mothers could capitalise their family benefit, if our country could care enough when they came back from the war, then it's time that we started saying, Kiwi Buy has come from the sector, and package it in a way where the politicians can argue against the neoliberal economics. We believe.
Kia ora. Thank you, Gary. Jessica?
So I'm introducing Wayne Knox from Te Matapihi.
Kia ora tātou. Te Matapihi are the peak body for Māori housing in Aotearoa. So we're the yin to Charles Yang, the the kid to the Mako night. Let's face it, the kid was cooler. Sorry, Scott. So one of the things I wrote on my postcard to myself was I'm going to go back and write a bit of a discussion paper for our board on incorporating a human rights-based approach into our strategy and into our advocacy, because, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but we still need to say it. And one of the things that is very relevant in that space is the current development of the government policy statement on housing. So, let's all agree to advocate that a housing rights-based approach, and which for us needs to consider the treaty, because it's in there about the undisturbed position, the tino rangatiratanga, o mātou whenua, o mātou kāinga, protect the right of Māori to undisturbed position of their whenua and their homes. So that's one of the action points for us from the conference. So, Cha, well done. Chair, Cha.
Kapai. Thank you, Wayne. Great. And Wayne, you and Patrick and I have had some fantastic korero together over these few days about what we can do together that we haven't been able to do to this point, but we're in a whole new day. So, kia ora. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Julie Scott. Julie's got a couple things I know that they're doing. And what does that number look like, Julie?
Thanks, Scott. So we have set the goal, our Housing Trust, of creating 1,000 affordable and community homes in the district in the next 10 years. It is a big goal considering we've assisted 175 households to date, but one of the key components that we think will get us there is inclusionary zoning. Brendan talked about that before, and the need for the government to come up with national legislation that makes it easier for councils to do it. We're in the very, very fortunate position of our council having led inclusionary zoning in the country. Probably, I think the first deed was signed in 2003. So we've received something like 17 million in either land or cash from developers who are going through an upzoning process and are required by our council to make a contribution back to the community. And that comes across to our trust, and we use that to house people. We've got stakeholder deeds in place. We're looking at another 40 million in the next 5 to 10 years coming across to us. So we've been able to achieve what we have because of this inclusionary zoning, and I just think it's so important for other councils to get on board with this, and if we have a government that supports it and makes it easier for councils to do this, because there is backlash from developers. No developer wants to hand over 5 or 10% of their sections to community trusts at no charge, but why shouldn't the community get some of that value uplift? So yeah, that's where we're at, Scott.
Kia ora, Julie. So that would be another, if I recall, that pipeline looks like about 1,000 units as well over the next 10 years. Okay, great. Folks, I'm up to about 4,000 units. I'm not just counting here, so just want you to know.
Ka pai, and I'm introducing Cassie from Action Station.
O tēnā tātou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, I ngā Pākeke, I ngā rangatahi, I ngā rangatira o tēnei hui. Kia ora, my name is Cassie. I currently work for Action Station, which is a community campaigning organisation, and we're about supporting communities to be able to address issues that are affecting them and to be able to create mass change. My background is in youth work, and especially, I guess, want to mihi to rainbow communities, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual, takatapui, whaawhene, who I majority worked with, who are disproportionately affected by housing and homelessness, and I'm not sure that I've heard our communities mentioned in this hui so far. So this is my background, and the reason that I'm speaking is that, I got last minute registered to come in here to be able to join all of you. I'm not a housing expert. I'm, a millennial who's living the housing crisis as we speak. And the first day was so heart-filling to be able to go back to this the simple idea of kāinga, of home, of heart, of warmth, of food, of community, of connection, of whenua, all of these beautiful things. And then I think somewhere along yesterday we started to overcomplicate things. Like actually, you know, if we get enough experts in the room, I do this myself, our brains are so big that we just kind of like work ourselves into these frenzies about what to do. And to me, what it comes down to is that we have been putting profit before people for far too long. This is the elephant in the room, is that it doesn't matter how many houses we build if all of our money keeps going to private landlords, to private companies. It's the same thing that's going to happen over and over again. So I just, at the moment, my heart is feeling quite, it is feeling quite sad, but it is also feeling quite angry because we don't have much time to be able to right the wrongs that we have been done. And what we've been seeing here is often the tip of the iceberg of what our communities are experiencing. I want to mihi to everyone who's on the ground working in community housing and putting up people in homes, because that work is hard. I know what it's like to be trying to find a 14-year-old who's homeless on the street and there's no emergency accommodation anywhere in your town to be able to put them up. It's beyond a crisis, and it's been a crisis since colonisation. So anyway, I'm not going to keep ranting on. If you do want to hear more rants, I'm around. But basically, at Action Station, you know, action is in our name, and I think that we need action to be able to move us forward. Every hui that I'm going to is talking about deep transformation. We need to make action, and we need it now. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Cassie. Look. Let me just put this out there. Why wouldn't we be teaming up with Action Station? Right? We're doing campaigns here. Shouldn't we be doing that? Right? What do we think, folks? Yeah. Okay. We're going to make that happen. Okay. Kia ora. Look, I've got another. I'm after some numbers here, folks. You're kind of onto it here. Greg, what's Salvation Army Social Housing able to contribute to this mix?
Kia ora, everyone. It's not often that I agree with everything that Gary Moore says, but on this particular occasion, I do. And the Salvation Army is a church that's really wanting to make a difference in the lives of the people that come through our doors every day. And right now we're currently building 120 units in Auckland that should be finished in 3 different locations, and they'll be finished from 4 months to the next year. And then after that, we're hoping to build 40 to 60 each year from there on in. We're leveraging that balance sheet to the best of our ability. If we got some more capital from the government, we could do a heck of a lot more. So 500.
I'm looking for bigger, Greg. Come on. I'm looking for 1,000. 5 years. Okay, so 10 years, we're at 1,000. Okay, sweet. Okay, you can tell my magic number here, folks. Now, we're going to start opening this up. Jessica, do you have another person? Who else would like to kind of just, you can get the picture here. We're going to really open up for another probably 15 minutes here or so. We want to just make sure we're really landing, I think, the consensus. Maybe I'll pose a slightly different question. Brennan put up for us a little bit ago a very compelling waterfall and a path forward for us. My sense is just looking around the room, I saw a lot of heads shaking. I'm taking that as consensus for a lot of ways. I'd welcome folks to think about commenting on that. Jessica.
Introducing Ella Henry. Not that she needs an introduction.
Stand up, Ella.
See how much difference it makes when I stand up? It's a miracle. Kia ora anō, kia ora koutou katoa, ki te minata tēnā koe e te rangatira. Okay, so I'm just going to tell a little story. 30 years ago this year, when I was a solo mum and I'd enrolled in university at the age of 31, I applied to capitalise on my child. And I was the last person that the Māori Affairs, because it was called that back then when they used to take care of Māoris who had affairs, which I had, I was the last person to get this. I know this because it was December the 20th, and back in the old days you had to go to the Māori Affairs office in Ponsonby Road and wait around for the phone call to come from the Wellington office so that the manager of the Auckland office could sign the cheque so I could get to the bank, because in those days the banks closed at 3 o'clock. And I was pacing because I was going to be able to buy a house. I was going to get $5,000
and I could spend 85,000 and I bought my first house, and I was the first one in my family, A, to go to university and B, to own a home. And I did that because of capitalisation. And if we cannot bring something by... You look at Māori home ownership rates after they got rid of Māori Affairs and turned it into something called the Iwi Transition Agency. Transitioning to what? Sorry, that was just an aside. There's a correlation between the drop in Māori home ownership and that. So if we're going to really think about, fighting against neoliberal economics and the corporatisation of the state, then that has to be absolutely at the top of our priority. If housing is a human right, then how do we make sure we give people the capital to get in that door? That's all I've got to say. Sorry, thank you.
Kia ora, Ella. Jane, I'm going to pass to Jane here.
Kia ora koutou. I'd like to thank the previous speaker, the little midget that got up and had a big waha that was really useful to listen to. Thank you, because you got up once before and I actually was very interested in what you had to say. Plus the gentleman in front of you that's got that mysterious beard. Both of you were talking about a concept that was around in earlier times. Why aren't we adopting that now? I don't agree with just buying and purchasing houses anymore. I believe that we should have the tenure of tenancy for life. If England can do it and other countries can do it, why can't we? And the reason I say that is because these properties are going up in prices simply because the developers have moved them big time, and those that are renting out to our people again, over 50% have been paid out for rentals, is because it's going into the private sector. If we change that, I know that private renters are nervous whenever government has a big push to put housing in, because it means the numbers are going to decrease for their need. So I do see the principle of these prices far too high. I see when we're developing these places, the cost is phenomenal. Why? And when you talk about Māori Affairs, you're quite right, because I did the same. I capitalised and I was able to buy in those days, and I wasn't on much. Why aren't they? Furthermore, they're going to do a big build out in Puriru. And I'm uncomfortable that when they talk about processes of talking to community, what a load of rubbish. They don't really mean communicate with them. What we should be doing is sitting at the table with the elected members, which is council, with our iwi, with the partnership, and we should be developing what that partnership looks like. Be inclusive by saying it, by bringing us in. Not having a hui later on where we're looking up and always constantly in protest about what's happening to us. So my push, and I did do that to the City Council last week, I put on the table, Housing Action Group want to meet with you, the politicians, to sit down around the table to design this so-called board that that government's putting in place. The government brings out a paper to its councillors who don't know what the hell it's all about. We took it to bits and we said, this is not what we want in our community. Now, we don't want a board that has directors that don't talk to us. We may want to change it around to trustees, I don't know. But we want something that's going to be where we are constantly in communication with that group. Second of all, we want a big build with 1.5 billion going into our community for the next 25 years. We want to be developing what that's going to look like. And so we want to talk to Auckland. We want to hear what Glen Innes has to say. We want to hear what all of the others have to say, because some of those concepts are not working. And so we need to be in the position as ordinary community people talking about vision. It's fantastic. We've got a golden opportunity to have room in there. We also should be acting as citizens. Citizens' role is not working anymore. We need to take charge of that and start to begin to behave like a citizen should. It votes every time. It should go in there and back our politicians. It should be sitting at the same table as them. So when we get bureaucrats coming to us and saying, we'll sort out a hui, no thank you. We want to talk to those that are our elected members, and we want to sit down with them and talk about what that hui will entail, what the quality of that in that hui should be. So that's my kōrero. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you for that. Jessica?
Kia ora, thank you. And Tamati Patuwai, GI.
Tamati Patuwai, GI. Tēnā rā tātou katoa e whaia, tēnā koe e whaia nanaia, mo tō tainga mai ki konei. Tēnā koutou Aotearoa Ngāti Toa mo tēnei whakaruruhau mo tātou I tēnei wā. Maui had guts to make change. He ventured across the Moana Pacific, a wide and mysterious place. and one of his names was Maui Mata Waru. He was able to diverge his thinking and see one thing from 8 different angles. So it takes a tribe to raise a vision. And so one of the things that I'm taking away from here is just this big tribe. Nau te roro, nōku te roro, kia ora ai tō tātou tumanako. Your food basket and my food basket, however small mine might be, will feed the vision forward. And I really back what David Zusman said before. We have got to be open to challenge, to critique, to conversation, and moving forward as a whānau. That's Maui Matawaru, the 8-eyed Maui. Maui Nanakia. We have got to behave mischievously sometimes. We've got to take a gamble and take some risk to venture out into the unknown. And there are so many unknowns, and there are so many barriers in front of us. Maui had a big moana that was not yet ventured into. What did he have? He had muriranga whenua, the blessing of his spiritual ancestor. The kauai, he had the jawbone of his ancestor. He followed the ancestral trail. What else did he have? He had the guidance and nurturing of his mother, Taranga. So we've got to look for the nurturing. We've got to look for the spiritual vision. And we have to keep talking to each other. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Thank you, Tamati. Anyone else? So do we have, before we move to our next stage here, we've got consensus, don't we? We've got consensus. I'm just looking, Kate's shaking her head, right?
We've got consensus. I just want the action that's going to follow. So I think everyone here is at the same point where we go, yeah, we've talked. We're on the waka. We want to go. How are we going to take the next step? And can I just say, Ōtautahi Community Housing Trust is also building houses in Christchurch. So we're in that other island that sometimes gets forgotten. I don't know why, we're really big. But we will be building houses, and they're houses for people most in need of housing on the social housing register. So we're building 40 before June next year, got another 90 in the pipeline, and working on another 60 after that. So conservatively, 500 in 10 years, optimistically, 1,000.
Thank you, Kate. Excellent. I think what we'll do at this point, Piri, I'm going to probably pass back to you and Brennan here. What I'll do is I'll pass back to you in just a second. And our next people, for our next stage here, if you want to kind of start moving up to the front. So we've got Mike Paku, who's the chair of Te Tai Whenua Heratanga, together with Emma Horgan, which part of the passing forward we want to do is to have them share with us what the Māori Housing Conference next April 2020 will do. But first, let me pass back, Piri, to you and Brennan. And Brennan, do you have any further thoughts from our korero that we've had this morning? Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou katoa, Scott. I say again, aku rangatira. Nā mātauranga, nā mana, nā reo, the voices and the mana and the authorities and the experts. Kia koe. Tamati, nau I kōrero mai I ngā nahi, kia mau tonu ki ngā pukenga Māori, ngā whakaaro Māori, te ao Māori, o na honohononga. Kia piki aki te mauri ki wainganui a tātou. You're all an inspiration to me as someone coming from outside of the sector, but I'd like to echo the kōrero of Tamati from yesterday, who placed us in a context of saying, if we hold tight to our human values, we succeed together. And that's why I said you guys are the shift, because as far as I've seen in your sector, that's what you do. And I guess my whakaaro is, this is alive, you know? And this is one of my learnings working for the board is stuff has a mauri, the shift has a mauri of its own. And as you said, Kate, we're on it. And I don't doubt that we're going to put some actions around it in the real near future. including around the Kāinga Strategic Action Plan, because I think one of the things the board brings, which is really interesting, is a permanence to the advocacy that it's undertaking. Because we're resourced in a way that Māori organisations aren't usually resourced, which is through ratepayers and through Auckland Council. And that means we can stand strong on the things that we say. And when we put an action plan out in the world, we're going to stand by it. And hopefully that can be one of the pegs, ka piki ake tātou, one of the pegs to lift us up to where we want to be. Kia ora.